From the Pennsylvania Environmental Council, this is Environmental Focus, insight and analysis from the people shaping Pennsylvania's environmental future.
In focus this month, it's going to be a challenging year ahead for the Pennsylvania DEP. The long-awaited Clean Energy Plan, new regulations for natural gas drilling, managing the creation of a massive gas pipeline infrastructure, and once and for all, reducing the flow of polluted stormwater into Pennsylvania's waterways are just a few of the major initiatives on DEP's plate as it starts a new fiscal year. But does it have the resources to do the job? We'll talk with the new boss at DEP, Acting Secretary Patrick McDonnell, in one of his first interviews since taking office. Then in our roundtable, we're joined by former DEP Secretary David Hess, Marcy Mowry of the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation, and Davitt Woodwell of the Pennsylvania Environmental Council, all in this month's Environmental Focus. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection is a busy place these days, and as Pennsylvania's largest environmental enforcement agency begins a new fiscal year, the next 12 months look to be even busier. But with the state budget debate ending in a whimper, does DEP have the resources it needs to provide the level of protection and enforcement we need? The state's field enforcement capability is already stretched to the limit, and with Chesapeake Bay requirements taking effect, the demand for greater enforcement is rising. Add to that the governor's Clean Power Plan, a call from the General Assembly to revisit oil and gas regulations, and much, much more. And it all falls on Patrick McDonnell, recently named Acting Secretary of DEP, who joins us in studio this afternoon. Secretary McDonnell, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's been said that the Secretary of DEP is the toughest job in Harrisburg. How's it going so far?
It's been really good. It helps to have an amazing staff, which I am blessed with in the department. I come into it with some experience within the agency, so that's eased it. It's certainly, as you just pointed out, any number of challenging issues facing the agency, but I'm confident we have a good team together to get us through.
For people who might not be from Harrisburg or be DEP followers, sure. Can you tell us a little bit how you got into environmental policy in the first place?
Certainly. I did a little bit of environmental coursework in graduate school, but I think really where the start for me was, I came into the state back in 1997 as a Pennsylvania management intern, and that meant I got to rotate around different agencies of the state. 7 different rotations, and I did 2 of those at DEP. And in particular, what struck me in that first rotation I did with Citizens Advisory Council to DEP was talking with staff, and it was clear they were taking the work home with them. And I don't mean paper, I mean the mentality, the ethic. It's vocational. So hearing folks talk about the fact that they need to leave on time that day to get to a township meeting so their township didn't do something on recycling or some other issue, it's hard not to buy into the mission and that work ethic throughout the agency, and been hooked ever since.
Good. So you've been at the job now 2.5 months or so. And it comes at an interesting time in the planning cycle for state government. Talk to us a little bit about your top 2 or 3 priorities for DEP in the coming year.
Sure, and you mentioned one, Chesapeake Bay is something I've been spending a lot of time on. We're hard at work looking at both agricultural impacts, working with county conservation districts, our own staff, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, in order to try to resolve some of those issues. And then in addition, we're looking at everything we can do, stormwater, other issues. Some of that is, as you say, compliance enforcement, inspection kind of work. But some of it is about making sure we're getting resources into the bay, working with third-party funders and others, so that we can make sure agriculturally we're doing appropriate planning, getting things on the ground. I've told my staff, I'm not interested in models and plans. I'm interested in nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment. How do we get it out of the bay, and what are the effective strategies to do that wherever that takes us?
Okay.
That's one. And then environmental justice is something we're talking about, focused on. We have a new environmental justice coordinator, in the agency, and he's been hard at work kind of putting together a plan so we can take it beyond what has traditionally been just permitting issues to, again, how do we deliver resources into our poorest communities, into minority communities, to make sure we're relieving blighted areas, delivering real economic opportunity. And then third thing I'd just say is looking at, to the resource issue, process improvement internally. How can we be doing our job better, more effectively? How does IT play a role? How does better training, better instruction play a role in terms of really coming up with things that are force multipliers for us to get more work done more effectively, more efficiently, being more transparent to those, both in the regulated community and concerned public.
Before you became secretary, you were the governor's point person on the Clean Power Plan. The original time frame for that plan was, I believe, September of this year. So where do we stand in the rollout of the Clean Power Plan?
Sure. It's a federal rule that specifically requires carbon reductions at existing power plants within our state and all of the other states, almost all the other states. Vermont gets off the hook for not having power plants in the continental U.S. Where we are is the original time frame was September. That was legally challenged. There's a stay in place. We've committed to not be doing the planning while that stay is in place. Now that said, there's a lot of work still going on in terms of other states. We've been in contact with our other PJM states, understanding what they're doing, what approaches they're looking at taking to this, because what our neighbors ultimately do is a lot of the impact. In addition, PJM, the grid operator, has modeling that they've been doing. There's other modeling out there that we want to work to understand, because ultimately, Clean Power Plan for me it's about carbon, but it's also about the energy future for the state. So depending on which levers you pull in the plan, when we ultimately have the opportunity to submit, those levers will ultimately indicate what kind of fuel mix we have on a going forward basis. So that's the conversation I think we need to have is both a carbon one, but also an energy future one around Clean Power Plan.
Can you talk a little bit about coordination between states of
Sure.
power plans? I mean, because it's the kind of thing that doesn't happen in a vacuum, right?
Absolutely. Electrons don't obey state boundaries. You know, we're reliant on PJM to operate the grid. Spent 3.5 years at the Public Utility Commission working a lot on PJM issues, and that coordination with other states dictates, you know, and how we make decisions within the Clean Power Plan will dictate which plants get dispatched, which don't. And that's really a lot of what this is about. It's an allowance price that gets factored into the energy markets that determines how a plant gets dispatched. So the goal for us is to understand what is the impact of that allowance price, what is the impact of the decisions that we make, and then how does that affect power flow, and what kind of things do we care about? Do we care about ratepayer cost? Do we care about jobs and job retention, job loss? Do we care about, we're currently the largest energy exporter. Do we want to maintain that status and the economic benefits that has? So all of those things are pieces of the conversation in addition to that fuel mix, fuel diversity piece, and of course, the ultimate goal, carbon reduction.
Mm-hmm. Now, earlier this year, the General Assembly passed a law requiring DEP to essentially start over with regard to conventional oil and gas operations. In a climate of budget austerity, that's a tough assignment for any administrator. How do you plan to address that?
Well, I think first it's useful to point out it's not exactly starting over in that we've had 5 years of experience doing this work. So we start from a good place in terms of what the reg that was abrogated or put aside was. So we're going to engage in a process going forward to look at that reg as we had promulgated it, work with the industry, and there's as part of the law, there's a new advisory committee formed within Department of Community Economic Development. we'll work with them, work with that advisory committee to come up with solutions I think we can all be happy with, all be proud of, and make sure that we're doing everything that both the governor, the legislature, and in particular the public and the industry can manage and make sure we have proper regulation.
As you pointed out a moment ago, 2017 is looming large over the head of Pennsylvania with regard to the Chesapeake Bay cleanup, which is a federally mandated cleanup plan for all the states that surround the Chesapeake Bay watershed. But there's no money in the budget, no increase in the budget for Pennsylvania for 2016-17. How does Pennsylvania plan to meet its federally mandated obligation without the budget increase in the DEP's budget?
Well, there's a few things. One, we're working with county conservation districts in order to engage them in helping us with inspection programs. That's been, for some, a lift, and we're working with certain districts that are interested in participating in the program. There's some others who won't, and there we'll be doing some inspections on our own. One of the other things, frankly, is making sure we're working smarter, not harder in this area, and that is looking at where are high priority areas, what are high priority best management practices we can install in those areas to reduce agricultural runoff. And then we're also engaged in a stormwater process through our MS4 general permit, which was released a few weeks ago to the public. We think that creates a framework where we're now not just managing stormwater by pipes, getting things away from properties as quickly as possible, but looking at how do we retain, how do we get more water into groundwater as opposed to running off into our streams, carrying sediment, carrying nitrogen, carrying phosphorus, and ultimately to the bay. And then finally, we're engaged with others to again, we have some resources or some other resources out there, and in that working smarter, not harder vein, making sure we're taking advantage of those resources that everybody understands. Here are the best areas for us to be focused on to get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of reductions. You know, again, I'm all about nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment in the bay.
Well, you mentioned stormwater. There's major stormwater management programs in place in both the western part of the state and in Allegheny County and in Philadelphia to reduce the impact of stormwater runoff on local water supplies. With consent orders, federal and state level consent orders, what's happening in the stormwater management area?
I think what we're seeing is communities, the department is working with communities to look at this differently. As I say, a lot of this traditionally has been about piping. How do you pipe stormwater away? We're doing a lot of what we call green infrastructure, and that is infrastructure that includes planting, includes ways of retaining water, detaining water in basins in particular areas where it's not, your traditional development with a little depression in the middle with some cattails growing into it, but really some features in urban landscapes, suburban landscapes that both serve an ecological purpose, but also enhance the community. So there's a lot of work in Philadelphia and Lancaster, now in Allegheny County, as you say, in order to try to install some of this green infrastructure to do a better job of managing stormwater. Again, doing some things in a make sense way as opposed to that traditional infrastructure approach that we've taken.
A lot going on, obviously, and it's a tall order for any secretary. But DEP Secretary Patrick McDonald, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. Good luck with all of the things that are on your plate in the coming fiscal year.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. When we come back, more on the state of Pennsylvania's environment and its priorities with our roundtable. Former DEP Secretary David Hess, Marcy Mowry of the Pennsylvania Parks and Forests Foundation, and Davitt Woodwell of the Pennsylvania Environmental Council. We'll be right back.
Clean, healthy air, clear, pure water, and a landscape where families and friends can experience all the natural beauty that Pennsylvania has to offer. This is the promise of Pennsylvania, a promise we must keep for generations to come.
Managing the challenges facing Pennsylvania's water resources, its demand for clean energy, a healthy climate, and outdoor recreation is what we do every day. We believe in the promise of Pennsylvania as an environmental and conservation leader and a showcase for the world. It's a promise that includes benefits for human health, the environment, the economy, and the quality of life for everyone who lives, works, and visits here. That promise is our legacy, and we hope that you will join us in making that happen.
So DEP Secretary Patrick McDonnell just laid out his agency's priorities for the coming year, and it's certainly an ambitious agenda. Which begs the big question: what is the state of Pennsylvania's environment? Are we moving in the right direction, and what challenges still lie ahead? So let's kick this around with our roundtable of heavyweights. David Hess is the former Secretary of DEP under Governor Mark Schweiker. He served in Pennsylvania state government for over 30 years and is now the Director of Policy and Communications with Creasy Associates here in Harrisburg. Marcy Mowry is the President of the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation, which works to provide a voice for Pennsylvania's 121 state parks and 2.2 million acres of forest land through public engagement, volunteerism, education, and recreation. And as always, Davitt Woodwell, President of the Pennsylvania Environmental Council. So Davitt, you heard Secretary McDonnell. From the Pennsylvania Environmental Council standpoint, what are the priorities, environmental priorities for Pennsylvania in the coming year?
I think Secretary McDonnell hit a number of them very well. He mentioned the Chesapeake Bay, he talked about drilling regulations, talked about DEP operations and funding. I think we'd throw in there sort of in the shorter, nearer term as well, methane, some kind of regulation of methane. We're certainly interested in the others as well. But I think there are also medium and longer term ones happening right now in Harrisburg. So you've got a General Assembly that isn't always looking favorably upon environmental and conservation issues right now, looking to roll back some issues, block others, and even promote private development state parks, as we saw last month, and that is still alive, that I think we'll probably talk about a lot. But I mean, right now, Secretary Hess, there's not a lot of time for this General Assembly before all these current bills sunset, but going forward, we've got other goals, I think, rolling into next year as well.
Yeah, I think what you're looking at is sort of two parts. One, there's going to be a fall session. The House and Senate are only going to be in 10 or 14 days, depending which one you look at. That's a very short amount of time before they have the November election. And all bills die on November 30. They have to by action of the Constitution. So we start over again in January. So it'll be a matter, a little bit of playing some defense this fall on some issues like making sure that drilling regs covering Marcellus shale drilling aren't weakened further. A huge issue was allowing private development in state parks that got a lot of attention by Marcy's group and Peck and a lot of other people in June when they had a vote. So a little bit of playing defense and then setting up what's going to happen, frankly, next year with the budget process, which is always a key issue. And we haven't gotten a lot out of the state budget process for Chesapeake Bay or other issues for DEP in the last couple of years. Again, I think Marcy can really tell us a little bit about what happened with the issue of state parks and private development.
Yeah, well, House Bill 2013 is one that we were very concerned about and are still concerned because, as you know, it was defeated on the floor, but through a procedural maneuver, it could come up for reconsideration before the end of the cycle. And what House Bill 2013 would do would allow private development at taxpayer cost in our state parks and state forests. Development that's not typical in our state park or state forest, Ferris wheels, amusement parks, water parks. And we're very concerned about the impact that this would have on our public lands. We have 121 state parks. And concerned too in the precedent that it might set in terms of how we utilize these lands that we are the stewards of for future generations. There was an amended bill that was introduced that basically charged DCNR with trying to decide where these types of developments could occur without any type of public process. And as you know, that's very important. Most of our public lands have a public process involved when we're doing something very different, and this bill did not
And this isn't
accommodate that.
And I don't think this is a discussion about should there be other activities in parks or anything. I mean, there are 2 state parks that currently have golf courses built a long time ago.
Right.
There are concessions in a lot of state parks, but it's the Pennsylvania model that's been so successful is not to go in and sort of do the lodge development that other states have done, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, we were voted the best state park system in the nation in 2009, in part because of the way we've been able to innovate and stay current with the trends and the needs of the users of our state parks. And people consistently say that lodges is not what they want. Certainly amusement park development. Like a day after the bill was defeated, I read a tweet that said that Pennsylvania had more amusement parks than any other state in the nation. So we certainly don't need additional amusement parks. There are resorts in Pennsylvania, so why would we compete with private industry within our state parks? State parks are really places where people go to reduce stress, to build family time. They're quiet, contemplative places where you can engage in a wide variety of recreation. You don't need to create the recreation.
I've also found it interesting that state and national parks are often early pawns in budget negotiations. So if somebody's going to cut off the funding, they say cut off the parks, and then suddenly everybody gets mad.
Yeah.
Fair?
Fair.
And did people come back at this one, at this
People
proposal?
came back at this one. People love their state parks. They expressed their concern. They called their legislator. They said, please leave our parks alone. We like them as they are. And there was another bill, House Bill 2188, which would propose 4 new golf courses built in state parks. And as you mentioned, Davitt, we already have 2 that sometimes struggle to make it meet. Across the state, golf courses are closing. Across the nation, we're losing golfers.
And I think also through all the state parks and the state forests and everything, that there's an unfortunate trend to look at them as piggy banks. At times, and you saw this with shale gas development in the parks, 600,000 acres of the state parks are available potentially for shale gas development. And we just got in Pennsylvania the sort of 21st century regulation of unconventional. We still don't have regulation of conventional, which is poorly defined because you can actually do unconventional drilling in conventional areas the way that the rules are written. Fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think part of this is a discussion over how we fund our state environmental programs. I mean, the budget that was passed this July really doesn't provide adequate funding except for cost to carry, as we say, the cost of carrying existing programs. And even there, it is not adequate at all. I mean, for example, this budget cut $39 million out of special funds that were going for environmental purposes. Again, this is the 14th year in a row that we've had cuts to environmental programs. You can't cut your way out of, in terms of environmental programs, be they environmental protection or park programs, you can't cut your way out of a budget problem. Sooner or later, and I think we're now at that point, you're going to have a serious discussion about how we fund these environmental programs, because that's been avoided, frankly, the last 14 years.
Yeah.
But now is the time.
When, Bob, you were asking about priorities in the middle and long term, also goes back to that funding and also questions of what do we do with the legacies we've got. And we've done another show on that. We've got abandoned oil and gas wells in Pennsylvania, we've got abandoned mine lands, we've got abandoned mine drainage, we've got sewer systems.
That we heard not long ago is going to take 100 years at the current rate of funding to clean up.
And that Secretary McDonald was talking about. So I think that the middle and long term is also trying to change the debate, the discussion somewhere to get folks to understand that the public lands and responsibilities need to be funded, need to be supported, and you can't just go in and try to get yourself out of budget deficits by developing more in the parks and the forests.
Well, and the tools they've used before, like putting an impact fee on Marcellus Shale drilling, that income is going down because we're having less drilling activity, and will be through at least 2018. So we're really between a rock and a hard place now in funding.
Yeah, and I was going to say, you mentioned sewage. A big issue is infrastructure, not just in state parks and state forests, but across the Commonwealth. If you want to talk about protecting the environment, we need to look at how we're going to invest in the aging infrastructure that we have. I look at it as a house. I mean, if all you do is clean and vacuum, eventually your roof is going to develop a leak, and if you just patch it, you're going to patch it again. You need to replace the roof.
And we didn't even start talking about the Clean Power Plan, energy issues going forward.
Chesapeake Bay.
Chesapeake Bay, with all the requirements there by next year, where EPA is now really starting to say loudly, I think, that Pennsylvania is not meeting its mandates and its requirements, and we are a major contributor to the Bay. And while we keep talking about the Bay, that's also a reflection on the state of the Susquehanna Basin, which is about half of the state. And we keep relating it to the Bay, but it's really about Pennsylvania in my mind.
Well, I think Secretary McDonald has a real challenge in front of him. I mean, he mentioned that they are doing a number of things to improve the efficiency of the department. And they have, like, for example, this year bought computer tablets for their inspectors, which they didn't have before. They were running on paper. So they're trying to do to do much more with less. But again, I think there comes a point where of diminishing returns. You can't do more with the less money that you have. And I think it's a real challenge for the agencies right now, both environmental agencies.
I would agree. I see a challenge too is being some of the effects on our forests. I mean, we have invasive insects that are removing our hemlocks, our ashes. We have invasive plants, so we're changing the face of the forest. And when you're talking about air pollution, they serve as carbon sinks. When you're talking about water quality, they slow down erosion. So they're an important part of those other environmental issues that we face, yet we're seeing a change in our state forest. Well, our forest, not just our state forest, all of the forest land across Pennsylvania.
But
Is that something that other states are experiencing at the same time we are?
I would say yes. I mean, the invasive they don't know the borders.
Right.
But I think, at the same time, we're talking a lot about defense. There is also, the offensive side, and not meaning bad offense, in a good way, offense, which is, looking at ways that we can move forward through things like the Clean Power Plan, through methane regulation, through conventional drilling regulation, and these other pieces, protection of the parks and forests, DCNR, and how it's managing gas development within its borders, within the forest, that there are these pieces that we need to keep pushing forward. So this isn't all about being naysayers. There's a lot of very positive activity here, including things like reforestation in the Chesapeake Bay drainage, people doing illegal dump cleanups, parks and forest and trail development throughout the Commonwealth that I think shows that there is an ethic in Pennsylvania that really is focused by most people on conserving, preserving, and improving various aspects of the natural environment.
Well, there's also a lot you can do. Chesapeake Bay is being talked about, and watershed restoration. There's a big role for private industry and private development in adopting practices that improve water quality. Land studies in Lidditz and Lancaster, Pennsylvania, have done tremendous projects cooperating with developers because they incorporate these advanced restoration techniques into their development. It doesn't cost the state or taxpayers anything, but it's a matter of changing the mindset to take advantage of some of those levers and some of those opportunities.
And we're going to have to make that the last word, I'm afraid, because we're just out of time. But I would like to thank all three of you for your thoughts and your ideas on this topic. Former DEP Secretary David Hess, Marcy Mowry of the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation, and Davitt Woodwell of the Pennsylvania Environmental Council. And thanks to you for joining us for this edition of Environmental Focus. As always, you can see a complete rebroadcast of this program on the PCN website at pcntv.com and clicking on the Sunday Fusion link. And all of our past shows, as well as lots of useful information on Pennsylvania's environmental priorities, can be found on the Pennsylvania Environmental Council website at pecpa.org. And we want to hear from you in social media. Follow us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at PECPA to be part of Pennsylvania's environmental conservation. We'll be back again next month for another edition of Environmental Focus. Until then, I'm Bob Oldman.